Welcome back. All right, so with the discussions of everything going on with Arizona right now, this leads to bring back the Nordiques, bring back the Nordiques, bring back the Nordiques. Now, I have a lot of Nordiques jerseys and a lot of Nordiques stuff because I'd love to see them come back too. However, I'm also realistic on this, and the feeling seems to be one of, well, Bettman doesn't want it. It's not really that. The National Hockey League, there were issues with the Quebec market that preceded the team moving, and I thought it was important to look at this. Now, interestingly enough, I've got a lot of NHL history books and whatnot, and when looking through for like, okay, here's all of these, there could be all kinds of details on the move in the Nordiques. Very, very little. Very, very little at all. So 94-95 was the last year for the Quebec Nordiques in the National Hockey League. And there were rumors all year about whether or not the Nordiques were going to stick around. And there was debate about whether or not they'd leave. They and the Jets both going through a lot at that stage. In fact, a week before the Quebec Nordiques announced that they were going to move, there was a kiboshed move for the Winnipeg Jets to Minnesota. There were rumors they were going to move to Minnesota, and it fell through. It did not happen, but of course we know that the Jets moved a year later to Phoenix, which is odd, and we'll discuss why that's odd as we go through this. So 94-95, they finished with a record of 30-13-5, 65 points, and I was rooting for them in those playoffs so hard. However, they lost in round one against the Rangers. Now, there was controversy in that loss to the Rangers. They lost a game by 1 goal in game 4, and it was a game where Andy Van Hellemond, the referee, took a goal away from Quebec. Quebec's going down the ice. They score. And Van Hellemond goes, sorry, I meant to blow the whistle back there because Kovalov was down. Kovalov was down. Now, Kovalov's down because he's looking for a call. He wants a call. He was faking an injury. And so Van Hellemond decides, I was going to blow the whistle. I didn't, but that goal from the Nordiques does not count, which didn't go over well. Now, the NHL reviewed the incident and took Andy Van Hellemond out of the playoffs. He didn't call any more playoff games. They said that was the wrong call. However, that game was lost, and ultimately the New York Rangers would knock out Quebec. Now, the Rangers got knocked out in the next round, but the damage was done for the Nordiques, and that was it. Now, Marcel Aubut, who tried to keep the team there or tried to move the team, depending on your point of view, you may believe he did everything he could to keep them there, or really liked lining his pockets. I guess there's one or two ways to look at this. Now, what he said was the new realities of the hockey industry, the size of the Quebec City market, and the absence of adequate government help sounded the knell of the Nordiques. So basically, the idea was he was going to the government and saying, look, we want to get some help. And Jacques Parizeau, who was the premier at the time, basically said, we'll buy you out and we'll spend a couple of years looking at the feasibility of a new arena and whether or not we need it. And obviously, Obut's not going to take that deal. But we'll come back to the government side of it as well, because we know that's changed. We know that now it's changed, and yet having guys in House of Commons putting on Nordiques jerseys and saying we'd love to have the Nordiques come back is quite different from actually getting the Nordiques back and saying we're going to put taxpayer funds towards keeping them here and subsidizing the team. Those are two very different things. It's easy to do one. It's much more difficult to sell voters on the other. So they did have a Save the Nordiques rally. And I remember this. There were 300 people that showed up to the Save the Nordiques rally. Now, I've discussed this in videos previous. And Nordiques fans around at the time have told me, hey, we knew the team was moving whether we showed up or didn't, so we didn't bother. We didn't think it was a big deal. But publicly, to the rest of the NHL and to fans at the time, it looked like indifference. The market doesn't care. And I'm not saying that they did, but it's definitely noteworthy, and it's something that showed up in a couple of different articles I found from the time. Because it was very noteworthy that you have this big rally and nobody shows up. Looking at Nashville, when Nashville was in danger of moving, there was a huge groundswell. And Winnipeg, for their credit, they did do everything they could to try to keep the team there, but ultimately they would move to Phoenix. Now, the team was sold to Comsat Entertainment Group for $130 million with the understanding they were going to move the team to Denver. And the Board of Governors would approve it. The franchise transfer fee was as high as $14 million. I couldn't find the exact amount they had to pay. So they pay $103 million for the team, $14 million for relocation fees to the NHL. And then, of course, whatever other costs are involved with moving a team from one location to another, which is a lot, but it's not quite the same as an expansion fee. An expansion fee is higher. Now, Marcel Aubut wanted a publicly funded arena. Now, Marcel Aubut was not an overly popular guy in general. And of course, we'll get into the Lindros thing too. But oh, yeah, Aubut was not an overly popular guy, and the government said no. And voters in Quebec agreed. They did not want to. They did not want to have the subsidy for a hockey team for millionaires and billionaires at a time where the economy wasn't fantastic. The economy was not great at that time, and they felt like, you know what? Nah, we're not going to do that. If they're going to move, they're going to move, but we're not publicly funding it. And so it does feel like that's changed now. But again, just because there might be some politicians now saying, "Oh, we'd love to help bring them back," doesn't mean that if you got an opportunity to bring them back, that they wouldn't say, "Well, hey, now you guys fund this yourselves. You guys are billionaires and millionaires. You guys figure it out on your own." And I'm not saying that's wrong. Just that again, the posturing is one thing, but the actual act of having the team come back is something different. Now, from 87-88 to 90-91, they were the worst team in the NHL. And it wasn't really close. The Quebec Nordiques went from a very respectable, very good team to horrible pretty darn quickly. And for me, as somebody who supported the Nordiques, because you had to choose between Quebec or Montreal, and I was like, oh, I'll support Quebec, it was a tough time. And so fan attendance dropped off. Fan attendance came back those last couple of seasons as the team got better. But you could see that financially things were starting to kind of level off and drop off for the Quebec Nordiques. Now, the Lindros Draft. At the time, Lindros cited not speaking French. He cited that there wasn't really a winning tradition in Quebec, and he cited a lot of things. Now, most recently, he cited Marcel Aubut himself as the reason why he didn't want to play for the Quebec Nordiques. But it was known before the draft he would not play for Quebec. He did not put on the jersey when he's drafted, and it took them a year to clear this up, where they traded him at the draft table in 1992, so they traded him twice. Philadelphia and the Rangers, and of course then that had to be looked at, and it was decided that the Philadelphia trade was the legitimate one. Interestingly enough, if the Rangers make that trade, maybe they don't win the Stanley Cup in 1994, so they might have done the Rangers a favor there. But the fact that they traded Lindros twice made the club look pretty Mickey Mouse. And the fact that Lindros wouldn't play there, again, it made the club look pretty Mickey Mouse. And there was a lot of discussion about players who just would not play in Quebec City. This was very heavily francophone. Like Montreal, you can find, a lot of English speakers. Quebec City, it's not as easy. You're really in the heart of where it is French speaking. And so you kind of have to know how to speak French in that market, which is fine. That's not a bad thing. But there are certainly players that would say, I'd rather not be in the Quebec City market. It is a small market as well. At the time that the Quebec Nordiques were in the NHL, they were the second smallest city with a Major League sports franchise, the smallest being Green Bay, Wisconsin. And Green Bay, with the Green Bay Packers, has been a model franchise for decades. They have done it right. Very difficult for Quebec City to do what Green Bay has done. I've seen people say, hey, there's no reason they couldn't be the Green Bay of the NHL. I think they'd have a tough time of it. So you've got a small market, and the problem with that small market as well was there's a lack of English language media, which limits the amount of exposure that market's going to get. Now, things have changed since 1995. With the internet and with all the broadcasting we have now, it'd be easier to market the Quebec Nordiques now than it was back in the mid-90s. But that was definitely something that was an issue, and it was definitely worthy of being discussed because it was very insulated. It did have that small market appeal to it, but it was a very isolated, insulated little area there, and so it did make it difficult for people outside of Quebec City to really get that exposure to what was going on. 1994 saw rumors of a move to Phoenix, and this is where Marcel Aubut got in the bad books of some of the locals, because the Nords said they're not moving. Nordiques are like, no, we're not moving to Phoenix. That's not happening. We're staying here. We just need to replace Le Colisée. Nobody argued they didn't need to replace Le Colisée. The argument was, do you need government funds to do it? And Marcel Aubut said, yeah. Jacques Parizeau said, no. So the government said no, the team said yes, which means they didn't get the money. And so that was the fight. That was the fight they were going through, and that's why when these rumors came out that they'd moved to Phoenix, they seemed to have some legs to them. It felt like, yeah, that could happen. Now, the Nordiques didn't lose money, and this is where things get kind of tricky, because fans will point out, hey, they were a profitable franchise, but they were trending in the direction of losing money. Marcel Aubut could see where player salaries were going. It was skyrocketing quickly in the early mid-90s, and it would continue to do so until the NHL said, hey, we're spending money we don't have. Can we get a salary cap? To which some people said, can't you guys just decide how much money you're able to spend? And the NHL said, nope. So they got their salary cap. If there'd been a salary cap in 1995, do the Nordiques move? The Nordiques likely would have been a team that would have been at the bottom end of a salary cap scenario. And then the one question to be asked with the Quebec Nordiques, and I think this would be a proper question to ask with this team. Valid's the word I was looking for, but a valid question to ask is, so if you get a team back in Quebec City, can you build a team that would spend right to the salary cap and build a contender? And I think that's a question the NHL might look at as well and say, with the small market, with the sort of isolated, it's a very francophone heavy area, and just with all the political stuff that comes along with having an extra team in Quebec, could you build a franchise that's successful long term, both on and off the ice? And I think there's still some questions there. I'm not saying it can't succeed. I believe it can, but I think this is where the NHL is with it. This is part of the reason why when Quebec City jumps into any kind of expansion discussion, the NHL goes, wait a minute. So then they hold off on it. So May of 1995, the US dollar was trading at $1.36 per Canadian dollar. Currently, right now, it is at $1.35 per Canadian dollar. And this is the trick of putting a team in Canada. So you just take Quebec City off here, you can put up Hamilton, Saskatoon, Halifax, wherever you want. You automatically have to pay way more money because you're paying in US dollars for your players, for your coaches, for staff, right? And the Canadian dollar has been low in that the US dollar has been worth between $1.32 and $1.39 Canadian over the past year. It is a really notable difference. So that is a big hurdle towards bringing a team to Quebec City, because now you've got the small market, you've got a weak Canadian dollar currently, so you're going to have to charge more for each ticket in that arena than you might have to charge in an American market, and all the fun stuff that goes with that. Now, the support for the Quebec Ramparts is strong. I will not make any debate on that. But WHL ticket prices, QMJHL ticket prices, OHL ticket prices, not exactly in the same sphere as NHL ticket prices. And as I said, they'd have to charge a lot. Because when you're looking at QMJHL tickets, you're not paying your players in American dollars. You're not dealing with anywhere near the kind of financial issues that you're going to have with an NHL team. So the Ramparts, very well supported, lots of attendance. You can get 18,000 people in the Videotron Center. Yep, that's not a problem. You have that NHL-sized arena, but there are some underlying cost problems. Now, Quebec Corps is still interested. They've been interested dating back to, I think the earliest article I found was 2013, where Quebec Corps has said, yep, we're willing to do this. And they run the Videotron Center. So this is the one hurdle that some cities that are currently looking at maybe getting an expansion team, this is the hurdle the Coyotes are currently going through. There's already an arena here. And so this is the one item where the NHL would look and go, okay, we've got an NHL-ready arena. We've got somebody who's ready to run the team. And last year, when there was talk of, Coyotes this, Coyotes that, Quebec Corps came out and said, we'll take them. But it's not that simple. And so while the NHL, I think, is willing to consider bringing a team back to Quebec City at some point, I do get why there's some hesitation on their part. And again, I 100% would support a Quebec Nordiques team coming back. And if the Nordiques came back into the NHL, they might crack into my top 3 favorite teams. It might end up being Vancouver, Boston, and Quebec City. Because honestly, I've missed the Nordiques for the last 3 decades. I'd love to see them come back. But I don't know if it's economically feasible. And again, almost any article I've looked at has also made mention of what I talked about the other day when I talked about the Americanization of the game. If you put a team in Quebec, how many brand new hockey fans are you creating? Almost none. Hockey is it is part of the culture in the province of Quebec, or Quebec, yes, agreed. And it is part of Canadian culture. So you're not really necessarily creating new fans, but if you put a team in Salt Lake City, if you put a team in Houston, if you put a team back in Atlanta, you are potentially creating new fans. You are potentially adding to the appeal of the TV deal in the U.S. If you added back the Nordiques, does that mean that Rogers would jump in and say, you know what, we'll renew our deal at the same amount of money that we've had it at for the last 10 years? I don't know, because the Rogers deal is coming up. And there's a lot of discussion about how much money Rogers has lost on that deal with the National Hockey League for broadcasting rights. So maybe an eighth NHL team in Canada would help to offset some of that, make them a little more gung-ho. But would a team in Quebec City make that big of a difference to that contract and to hockey in Canada? And so there's the question that's out there, right? So I do expect that if we don't see the Arizona Coyotes being able to stick it out, if we do see them end up in Utah, that'll just lead to further discussions of Quebec. The one thing to keep in mind is, let's just say that the Coyotes make that move. They end up in Utah. Well, now you've got a potential expansion team in Utah off the board, right? Yes, the NHL could look to expand to Arizona, but would they? And so that's a whole other discussion for another time. But I think that opens the door for Quebec City should the NHL decide to expand further past 32 teams, that maybe they get an expansion team. And as I've discussed, it might be cheaper to get a relocated team. So you might have an easier time if you're Utah getting the relocated Coyotes than getting that expansion team. It's a little cheaper. But it can be tough too, because now you've got a team that's already got all these contracts, got all these players, and you're stuck with trying to figure out, okay, which works and which doesn't. It's a little bit harder than that clean slate you'd get as an expansion team. And for the Nordiques, I'd love to see them come back as an expansion team. I'd also like to see them come back with this jersey and this logo, but that really sweet Husky jersey that they were going to change to the year they actually moved to Denver instead, I'd love to see that as a third. It's a beautiful jersey. It's never actually been officially produced, but you can find, I don't want to use the term knockoffs, but you can find kitted jerseys where they've put it together. It looks absolutely fantastic. So at any rate, the Quebec Nordiques are going to be a topic of conversation for hockey fans for a long, long time. I think sometimes we romanticize the Quebec Nordiques a little more now than what they were back in 95, because again, when they moved, there wasn't a whole lot of uproar. It just wasn't. Media-wise, I know basically the discussion for me with my friends at the time was, I don't know how much interest there is in keeping of Quebec City. Did you see that Save the Nordiques rally? And again, I understand that for fans in the area at the time, they were like, we had reasons not to want to go to that rally and feel like it's a waste of time. But it was just one of those things that stuck out there. So at any rate, there you go. My take on this. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. I don't think that there's necessarily a 0% chance we get the Nordiques back, but it is going to take a lot. It is going to have to be something dramatic. The one thing that, if you want to go further down the road, how did we get the Jets back? We got the Jets back because the Atlanta Thrashers lost their arena. They needed a place to play immediately. Quebecor, that arena for Videotron is open. Quebecor wants to own a team. In the event that an NHL team doesn't have a building for the upcoming season, they have to find a place to play immediately, like the Thrashers did. That's where Quebec City would be in good shape. And maybe at that point you'd see the Board of Governors say, you know what? The arena's there, we can do this. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming years. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event that you didn't already. But I wanted to talk about what led to the Nordiques ending up moving and just how that feeling was at the time. And yeah, just let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I do hope they come back. I will talk to you again soon.